started. I want to welcome our audience to a series on COVID-19. Our panel's called Reaction to Action. And I want to start off with welcoming our audience and also in particular our session chair, Jan Shea. Jan is a tireless organizer behind this conference, the National Civic Leadership Forum, and she also serves many different roles, which include president of the Asian Culture and Education Society of USA. She's a board member of the United Chinese Americans, one of the co-sponsors, and also vice president of OCA Dallas-Fort Worth. I'm so pleased to welcome Jan Shea.
Thank you, Ariana, for your introduction. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate Dr. Law, AEUC President and NCLF 2020 Chair, Dr. Law, for giving me this opportunity to put all the community together, come here to sharing your experience. And thanks Junjin TV for broadcasting our event. Thanks CLUSA Tech Support Wen Yuan, and thanks our volunteers Glenn and Luke. Now I'm honoring to introduce you our keynote speaker, Aryani Ong. Also, she is today's moderator. Aryani Ong is a former civil rights lawyer who specialized in addressing hate incidents targeting Asian Americans. Since 1999, she has spoken to audiences around the country. During the pandemic outbreak, she has worked with government officials and community leaders on the national, state, and local levels to raise awareness of anti-Asian incidents and advise on response and prevention. Aryani is a founding member and a senior advisor of Communities United Against Hate, an anti-hate crime coalition in Maryland. As a community leader, she also has served in many roles to leader trainings, build bridges, and promote improved understanding of Asian Americans. Aryani currently is working on a blog called Six Hills to elevate stories with multi-dimensional perspectives, especially from Asian Americans. Now welcome our very own Aryani Ong.
Thanks, Jan. This is my opening statement. I just want to say that in the wake of COVID-19 at the beginning of the year, we saw an outpouring of anti-Asian incidents. In fact, there were 100 complaints that were being directly reported to hashtag Stop AAPI Hate every day for the first several weeks. And in total, where we stand is about 2,600 documented incidents. Of course, those are underrepresented because not everyone decides that they're going to go online and track the incidents. But anecdotally, it has spread to the point where, according to a study by the University of Maryland and a number of professors who polled Asian American adults and youth from mid-March to the end of May, 75% had witnessed anti-Asian hate, which is quite staggering and doesn't even begin to speak to the direct and long-lasting impacts that have, on our youth. For the adults, to many, they had not seen such overt acts since their playground days. But for me, as someone who had tracked anti-Asian incidents nationally with civil rights groups, the actual incidents themselves were not as much of a surprise as the scale. And I just want to explain that in the span of the 20 years that I've worked on addressing discrimination against Asian Americans. I've spoken to audiences around the country, including the UN Committee for Elimination of Racial Discrimination and organized community responses to what I call hate eruptions. These are like when racist shows or commercial products, public officials making racist statements, other official statements, problematic statements, organizing communities to respond to those issues in a way that's effective. I also worked with former Secretary Norman Mineta to negotiate memorandums of understanding with major TV networks on a diversity initiatives, and that was to promote more diversity before and behind the camera, as well as lobbied on the Hill for stronger protections against hate crimes. But in the span of all those years working on that, I was surprised, even though not by the nature of the incidents, but again, the full scale of them, by this outbreak in this past year. And it's caused me a lot of concern. And upon reflection, I have then considered that we are living in cycles where we're coming together and addressing these incidents and then sort of disappearing until the next cycle begins again. So where do we come from here? It seems to me that we have to address a number of issues. And first among three is invisibility. I mean, we're invisible to the federal government in terms of the lack of data on Asian Americans, and particularly those that lift up all the diversity of the pan-ethnic communities within the Asian American community. We are invisible in pop culture and media, although been making some gains there, and in leadership, top leadership positions across all industries. And number two, what that does is that it creates a blank canvas. It allows us to be used as a wedge against other minority groups. And it also allows us to be de-individualized, meaning to allow for people to apply characteristics of a group to us and use to deny Asian Americans from being able to rise past bamboo ceilings and in non-traditional fields like sports and politics and Hollywood films. So to be sure, we have made progress, right? We have more elected officials. There was a sweeping wave 2 years ago. We have more Asian American judges on the bench. We even have had crazy rich Asians. But it didn't inoculate us from the national phenomena that was COVID-19 related hate. And we bear this stigma simply because we look like people from a different country for whom the virus attacked first. So the purpose of this panel is to foster a conversation about ways that we can collectively harness the organizing power, the creative talents, and people to do something akin to what Jewish Americans have done with Anti-Defamation League, to employ polling, to offer training and education materials, to engage in advocacy, tapping in both public and private sectors, to drive long-lasting public relations campaigns, and most importantly, to build coalitions across industries. Each of the panelists that have been invited to speak today were on the front lines of this effort. And so I'm very pleased to have them here with us, because what I hope is that we can also begin through this conversation an alliance that we can expand outwards and move out of this cycle of reaction and into a more proactive space, even if it means bringing strange bedfellows together, because in fact, as we have seen in the past year, we're all in this together. So with that, I want to move into the introductions of our panelists. We have three, and I want to start with Gurwin Singh Ahuja. Gurwin is co-founder and advisor of the National Sikh Campaign. He has served as National Field Coordinator for President Obama's re-election campaign as an advisor to an ambassador in the Obama White House. He's also founder of Know Your Neighbor Coalition, which is a coalition of leading civil rights organizations backed by the Obama White House and focused on fostering a national dialogue in the country's growing religious diversity. Gurwin is currently a student at Columbia Business School and is advising Biden for President campaign. Welcome, Gurwin. I also
Hey guys, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Would you like to add anything to that introduction?
Nope.
Okay, we'll be back with you in a moment. I also want to introduce Bing Chen, an entrepreneur, creator, and equalization builder. Bing also serves as chairman and co-founder of Gold House, the largest collective of pioneering leaders dedicated to forging stronger bonds that enhance Asian representation and success. He is also general partner and co-founder of the AUM Group, a multicultural film fund. He also serves as board director and advisor to several leading digital media companies such as Google's Global Marketing Board, Snap's Yellow Incubator, Omnicom Sparks and Honey, Baobab Studios, Aura Health, and more. Previously, he was YouTube's global head of creator development and management, where he was one of the original and principal architects of a multi-billion-dollar influencer ecosystem that supports 5 million creators worldwide. So welcome, Bing.
Thanks for having me, Aryani.
Last but not least, we have Gregory Cendana, dancer, strategist, and entrepreneur. Gregory, to me, most well known as co-founder of the People's Collective for Justice and Liberation. He's also president of Can't Stop, Won't Stop Consulting. And in that capacity, he has hosted digital town halls, bystander intervention trainings, and online panel discussions. And I've been to one of them, Gregory. That's commanded like 2,000 people in the audience, I recall this. Addressing issues raised by COVID-19 in the Asian American community, drawing upon a vast network of grassroots organizers who work across multiple communities of color. The People's Collective has developed a year-long program of town halls that comprehensively explore how AAPIs can work in partnership with other communities of color in the wake of COVID-19 to dismantle structural racism. Gregory is also the first openly gay and youngest ever executive director of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance and the Institute for Asian Pacific American Leadership and Advancement. To add more titles there, he's also chair of the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, co-founder of the Diversity Initiative Inclusive, and serves on the board of directors for United We Dream as treasurer and 18 Million Rising as chair. Welcome, Gregory.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do is to further our introductions of each of our panelists, ask them a question to describe the organization that they represent and their role. I'm also interested to hear from you how your organization decided to counter discrimination. If you could explain the projects and the programs and initiatives that your organization carried out, and whether they were short-term, such as in response to COVID-19, or if they have been running for a while and are long-term. So let me start in the order that I introduced our panelists, and with Gurwin.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the founder of Sikh Campaign, or We Are Sikhs, and the purpose of the organization is to help share the values and the contributions of the Sikh American community. We believe in gender equality, racial equality, and religious tolerance for all people. And the impetus for making this organization is, even though we're one of the largest religions in the world, and even though we're the third largest monotheistic religion in the world, most Americans just don't know who we are. And we felt that it was our duty to share who we were. So in terms of tactics, what we do is we've partnered with the folks that helped develop President Obama's effectively message when he was getting started, the people that created Hope and Change and the Rising Sun logo. And we worked with them to develop a strategy on messaging and distributing our message, which includes television ads, digital ads, earned media, grassroots events. And we've been doing that over the last 3 or 4 years now. And now we're starting to extend into partnerships like with Funny or Die or PBS and Ben and Jerry's. And so we just run a comprehensive effort touching every medium to help get our message out there about gender equality, racial equality, and religious tolerance. And the most important thing outside of the tactics is really how we convey our message. I think in the era of social media, I think we've gotten very comfortable as activists, basically patting ourselves in the back and getting affirmation online from people that already support us, which is really, in my view, at least in the work that we're doing, not the goal. The goal is to help inform and educate people that otherwise would not have heard our message. So in that vein, we have taken the attitude of calling people in instead of calling people out. And we have found that simple notion has been very effective for us and has been able to move the data in a very positive direction in a very short amount of time in a very polarized era. So that is National Sikh Campaign.
Thank you. Bing?
Hi, I'll focus on Gold House. As Aryani mentioned, Gold House is the largest collective of Asian cultural leaders in the country across media, entertainment, lifestyle, technology, and finance. Our principles are fairly simple. We think that the way that we increase the standing and potential to elevate others in the Asian diaspora is by being a carrot, and then someone else, of course, is going to be a stick. Our focus on carrot is how do we make the Asian diaspora essential to society, undeniable, and unavoidable? And we think there are 3 ways to do so. One is accurate media portrayal that can shape public opinion. Second is commercial success so we can sustain our influence as well as employ others. And then finally is cross-cultural unity. On media representation, we are the marketing reason why Parasite and The Farewell were 2 of the top 4 highest performing films per theater average last year, which is Hollywood's North Star metric. We know that film, no way to belittle the other essential formats of art, but film is still considered the high art. So even though many other industries like sports, music, and TV in particular are harbingers to inclusion and accurate representation of Asians and other communities, the reality is until film touches it and cements it, there's not as much of a global shift. So we have a whole system there to not only develop and accurately ensure that scripts reflect our community, but also to finance and produce films, and then also, of course, distribute them to great success. We know that traditional media, as backwards as this sounds, and I say this especially sheepishly being from the internet, we know that traditional media is still incredibly essential because 80% of the world's consumption of traditional media still comes from the United States, which is terrifying if you're not from the US, but quite a responsibility if you're here. Our second focus, once we believe that we accurately portray ourselves, is how do we sustain that commercially? There are, as with all things, 2 ways. One, you can wait decades to ascend the C-suite to a Fortune 500 company. We have many of these leaders in Gold House and we celebrate them, but the reality is that is a multi-decade long effort, and there are so many other organizations doing incredible work there already, from LEAP to NAP to ACE and so forth. And so our focus is actually instead on Asian entrepreneurs. Really encouragingly, if you look at the data, 30% of the companies founded in the last decade worth over $500 million, which for our purposes means you are successful, has at least one Asian American founder. Now, if we calculated and added Asian founders, so we count the ByteDances and the Meitus and so forth of the world, that number skyrockets. So this is just API founders. So 5.6% of the population is driving 30% of the most successful companies the last decade. That is an enormous feat, and it's something we have to gas up and be proud of. And so we have a whole ecosystem here where we welcome different founders in our network. We have the largest investor syndicate for Asians in the country. That's not only traditional top investors, but also family offices and cultural leaders. And then finally, for the most promising, we have a founder accelerator to turbocharge the success of those that we think are really going to be the next YouTubes, Twitches, DoorDashes, Honeys, and so forth. Finally, though, is we don't just want Asians to be in a position to help themselves. We think that we've seen the demise of other communities, at least socially, because they've only focused inward. We think that we exist here to serve the world because we're all human beings. And so we've initiated across these efforts and others a slate of sort of supportive vehicles to elevate particularly the Black and Brown communities and learn from their own experiences. So just to rally off a couple of examples, we've raised multiple six figures to provide small business relief, as well as equal justice opportunities to organizations like the Equal Justice Initiative to support different Black and Brown communities and or other minority communities that may be disproportionately advantaged by our judicial system. There are other opportunities where we try to also facilitate media representation opportunities, particularly for the Black community. That's not just because we want the Asian community to learn about the experience of another rapidly growing and essential community, but there's also a commercial imperative because minority communities, as you could probably guess, control a disproportionate amount of box office. So across all these efforts, you know, we really are trying to put the Asian community in a commercial as well as sort of just social position to not only support itself, but support itself so that it can support others as well.
Thank you for explaining that digital medium, your work in that area. That's very important, especially during this COVID-19 time where everything we're doing is over these platforms. Gregory.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Gregory Cendana. I'm the president and co-founder of Can't Stop, Won't Stop Consulting and co-founder of the People's Collective for Justice and Liberation, alongside my other co-founder, DJ Cuttin Candy, who is with the organization Asian Solidarity Collective. Before we begin, I just want to ground myself and ground others in that my ancestor is wildest dreams, and I am here, and I believe we are here because of them and those who came before us. My people are dancers, they're storytellers, they're healers, and my people believe nothing about us without us, and that justice should not be for just us. And my people speak truth to power, bring their full selves into any place they're in, and believe in our power to organize, make change, and change the hearts and minds of everyday people. A little bit more about the People's Collective is that we emerged in the spring of 2020 as a direct response, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, into the rise of anti-Asian scapegoating and racism as COVID-19 rapidly spread. Simultaneously, and following kind of the start of that, the New York Times called the response to police violence and racism the largest uprisings and protests in United States history, which arose due to the lynchings of Black unarmed people, including George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Tony McDade, which ignited the call for redefining safety and security in our communities and strengthening the need for transformative cross-racial solidarity. The People's Collective is a pro-justice movement. We define as a pro-justice movement of Asians and Asian Americans who are building with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and who organize with an intersectional, multi-generational, and cross-sector framework. And we are committed to a radical, liberatory, transformative framework that, and wanting to create a world that reclaims the dignity, self-determination, and humanity of all marginalized and oppressed peoples. We are a group of critical thinkers, community organizers, and cultural workers who are collaborating to actualize more possibilities, even in the midst of global chaos, and that advance the cause of our ancestors for racial, gender, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, two-spirit, intersex, asexual, agender, disability, economic, and environmental justice. And our theory of change is that we partner with individuals and organizations who have a track record and who share these values through a variety of programming, including our Building Solidarity Town Hall series. We started those, it doesn't seem like too long ago now, but in March of this year. And the first one that we did was specifically on anti-Asian racism, called Race, Struggle, and Solidarity in the Time of a Global Pandemic. And we had more than 6,000 people join on Zoom, more than 30,000 folks watching on our different social media channels. And we had the hashtag anti-Asian racism trending nationally. We've continued that town hall series with town halls around redefining safety and security, on education, structural racism, combating ableism, youth justice and organizing. And we actually have one coming up later this month on elections and electoral justice. In addition to those town halls, we also launched what we call collective classrooms, which is a series of more intimate and roundtable discussions where we can really dig in deeper into some of the topics that are raised in the town halls. And we actually just last week finished a partnership. It was a program with the Bulasan Center, which is housed at the Department of Asian American Studies and the University of California, Davis. And we called it the University for Justice and Liberation, which is a 6-week intensive political education course. We had more than 300 folks sign up for the course, and we just finished it last week. And we are going to be doing a graduation for that course later this month. And so our hope is to be able to build upon these types of programs and partnerships. And if you're interested in learning more, we actually have a lot of the recordings. We have graphic recordings and other resources available on our website at People's Collective, the number 4jl.org. And we're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Thank you, Gregory. All our panelists, organizations have covered a significant ground. And so honing it down again to the COVID-19 related anti-Asian incidents, I'm curious to hear from each of you whether during that period when you were hearing about these, were there conversations inside your organizations that were self-reflective, where you were looking at, what were the challenges before you? Did you measure the effectiveness of the work that you did to address them? How did you define success? So again, if we could start with Gurwin.
Yeah, on that front, I think our Chinese brothers and sisters, Japanese brothers and sisters, and Korean brothers and sisters were far more affected by that level of discrimination than the Sikh community. But it was a moment in which we could relate. We're just celebrating the 19th anniversary of 9/11, and when that news broke, and when you hear stories about people being bullied or being harmed, it was reminiscent of that time on almost 20 years ago, where you're being associated with something that you have nothing to do with, and it was definitely a moment of reflection in that respect. And I think this would be my final point on this. It's another thing in terms of the zeitgeist that we're in, where having good leadership in this country would go a long way in not completely stopping these things, because they're not going to stop. There's always going to be people that are irresponsible and won't do the right thing, but not fanning the flames by continuing to marginalize certain groups. Like, for example, calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus, that didn't help. And it only gave cover to people that wanted to act on their biases. So, at least during 9/11, the Sikh community, the Muslim community, et cetera, actually had the good fortune of having a leader in our country that chose very deliberately not to fan those flames. And you can say what you want about his politics. I personally was not a huge fan of the 44th or 43rd president. I was a fan of the 44th president. But it makes a big difference. And I hope we think about that, particularly given that we're in an election year.
Thank you. Bing, you know, one of the first campaigns that I saw in response to COVID-19 was Wash the Hate. That was a campaign, and I think that is something along the lines of the work that you do, having been a former, leader in the YouTube company. So, what did you have these conversations within your circles about what were the challenges and successes that you encountered? How did you measure the effectiveness of the responses that you and your colleagues made?
We did. I think the first realization was how conditional our acceptance in society is. And we've already seen this in sort of non-political realms. So, and political, I would include sort of activism realms. So for instance, Asian women, according to Harvard Business Review, are the least likely demographic to get promoted to management in this country. Asians are, of course, the least likely race. They call this the bamboo ceiling. You see this particularly pronounced in technology and finance, where we're a disproportionate percentage of employee bases, but less than half of executive ranks in single digits in the C-suite. And even when you look at the C-suite, often those people are not Asian American, they're Asian, which, by the way, for the record, I don't think is a problem at all, but some people do. And some people, the 22 million do. And so I think one of the first stark, shocking things was, oh my God, people don't like us and they're willing to erase us and demean us in this way. And I think it was really resounding and inspiring to see the volume of campaigns. I feel like there was like 7 campaigns that were similar to Watch the Hate that came out. And I like it because it raises awareness. The challenge is most of them are backwards looking and not actionable. So we know that people are beating us. Great. We've now normalized it, right? Now what? So we think, again, there are 2 ways that you fight back. We think one is you fight back productively by owning commercial systems, by owning how you're projected on screen, and once again, making sure that you're undeniable. That's Goldhouse's priority. But the other is we need punitive measures. People need to know that there are actual repercussions that are palpable, whether you lose your job. In the case of the gentleman in Newport Beach, that works at Prudential as an advisor this past weekend, who, effectively verbally assaulted Sophia Cheng, the designer. There need to be actual concrete punitive measures as well. And that's something that the Asian community has not done concretely. And so I think, one is we have to fight back harder, both, positively, I'd say, and productively, but also punitively. And it's going to take that duality to get there. The second piece that we need is we need even better data. So Stop API Hate did a phenomenal job with tracking the attacks, but attack numbers are only valuable if you have a baseline. We've never had a baseline because we've never really had this pronounced problem, or rather, we haven't had this problem in decades, I should say. And so I'm not implying that I want to have a baseline, that is widely known, but I think it is important so we can track our progress. The third piece that I think was really revelatory for us is we in the Latinx community in particular have a, disproportionate disadvantage because we are dual nation individuals. The Black community, of course, doesn't necessarily have this because their history was stolen through slavery. But if you look at the Latinx and the Asian communities, which we all know are the fastest growing immigrant populations in this country in the coming decades, will be the largest immigrant groups and minorities. We have identities that are both here and in the motherland. That also means we have different values that at once, to be tropish, you take your shoes off, you care about your elders, but also you're a millennial who's self-expressive in the West. And having these dual allegiances are really coming to bear. Something that a lot of my, especially particularly influential Chinese colleagues and candidly superiors have said is they don't trust the Chinese government. They don't like that it's being called Kung Flu, but they also understand. And so this just underscores the immense challenge that people like us have of Asian Americans are wedged in between 2 continents. And so the question then becomes, once again, productively, well, how do you fight back? No one has a good answer, right? We're all learning as we go. But I do think that there is a place for one, let's continue to own and assert our narratives and companies so we can actually preempt the next time someone tries to fire us or tries to speak down to us because there's a certain way they should be thinking and treating us. And then the other side is we do need more aggressive punitive measures. The final piece, just to answer more specifically, Aryani, is Goldhouse thought for a long time, should we actually basically create a police force, right? Should we actually create an ADL, which has $100 million OpEx every year, right? We realize we cannot and should not do everything. No organization should, and that's not our strength. Our strength is on the positive productive side, period. And so our success metrics remain unchanged. How many stories are developed, financed, produced, and debut at #1, and then perpetuate across other media formats? And we know the power of this in sort of downstream metrics. The second on companies is how many companies progress through their various financing or revenue target stages, and then at some point become emerging or actual unicorn founded businesses. When you know that you can employ thousands of people, when you can control who your board is, and when your company, whether in the case of Snap all the way to YouTube, is well embedded within Canon, you have a different kind of power. And that's the type of power we're focused on.
Thank you. Gregory, I undercounted your audience. It's not 2,000, excuse me, it's 6,000. And by any metric, that's very successful. Did you use any other metrics during and after those town halls that you sponsored?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely had the metrics of the number of folks that joined on Zoom, and we also streamed our town halls on Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch as other ways for folks to access the town halls. We continue to also think about, in addition to like people actually tuning in, like how we also did surveys after each of the town halls to gauge like what are other issues that you want to work, like that you're interested in, and then to also figure out if there were organizations or campaigns that we can funnel people to, because we recognize that as people were learning more about kind of the climate, you know, in terms of the pandemic and the response that people were having in terms of the scapegoating through the anti-Asian hate, or even the ongoing ways in which people were understanding like how they were, like the needs and what they needed as they were navigating the pandemic, right? Because even, you know, outside of that increased violence and hate, there people were like, well, do I still have access to healthcare? Like now I have to figure out distance learning for education. Like, what does it mean for me to still go to work if I have to leave my house? Or what does it look like for me to now work from home? And so we wanted to be able to be holistic in how we were responding to folks and connecting them to resources. And so for another metric that we were looking at is like how many organizations and how many campaigns were we serving as a bridge for? And we continue to find additional local, national organizations and campaigns, and are working to continue to, you know, find more opportunities for folks. And as we've done more town halls and done more programming, we've been able to see and find new and different organizations. I think one thing that I'll just, I also want to add to as it relates to kind of this idea is, I think, you know, we were founded because we felt like there was a narrative that was out that was talking about how people were feeling that non-Asian people of color were not standing with those who are being impacted by the increased hate and violence. And that there was also this notion on, well, what does it actually mean to be safe and secure? And so part of our hope was that we could actually, one, like let people know that transformative cross-racial solidarity was not only needed and possible, but that it's been done. It happens. There are examples of folks showing up for each other no matter race, ethnicity, and a variety of identities. But we're clear that our community sometimes as Asian Americans are used as a racial wedge to divide and conquer other people of color. And so in order for us to be able to address that, we need to kind of lift up the stories and narratives of the examples of when people have done the hard work to like learn, to grow, to build, and to be in what I like to call principled struggle, to understand like the nuances and the differences of our experiences, but how we come together because we actually share a lot of similar values and a similar vision for what the world and our community should look like. And so one thing that I'll share is we use this model of transformative solidarity, and solidarity having, you know, using this model from DRUM, which is an organization called Daisy's Rising Up and Moving. They have 4 different levels. The first is symbolic. The second is transactional. The third is embodiment. And then the fourth is transformative. And so while we recognize that different people are depending on your relationship with different folks, are at different levels of that kind of solidarity, our ultimate goal, or at least a part of our vision, is that we really build to that transformative level. And that doesn't happen overnight. That's not going to happen on one Zoom town hall or webinar. But we want to be able to facilitate and create spaces and opportunities for folks to understand kind of what that could look like, and to lift up models of places where we've seen that successful too. And I think that's a little bit harder to measure, but it's something that we want to continue to encourage folks to build deeper and stronger and more sustainable solidarity with different communities.
Thank you. Gurwin, I've seen some of the work from the National Seat Campaign, and as a nonprofit, I also know the struggles of funding. If you were to come by additional like foundation monies, for example, what would you do with that campaign? Would you scale up? Would you take it a different direction? Could you share some of the inner conversations in the organization about the National Seat Campaign?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we're talking about actively right now. Honestly, I think we would double down on what we're doing, particularly on the digital media space, because, we're in the business of awareness and sharing things. And I think COVID has really accelerated the inevitability of us becoming digital. And I don't think that's going to stop when we leave the pandemic. And we also have a situation where, when we started, a big deal for us was to be covered by an outlet, or having a newspaper write a nice article about us. That is still a big deal, but it is really not, it is only a small piece of the puzzle now, whereas before it was like hitting an absolute home run. So, if someone gave us a big grant, we would invest heavily in really two things. Number one would be expanding our digital media operations, and number two would be partnerships. Because within our own community, it's very important that we work with other communities. It's really the whole essence of being a SIC, is really respecting everybody's humanity, regardless of who they are. So we would double down on all of those things to do good work with other communities and to amplify what we stand for.
Thank you. Bing, I don't know if you have the same challenge that we do in the nonprofit in terms of resources, but what would you do if you were able to expand your staff? You came by additional resources.
Gold House actually is a 501c3 nonprofit.
I see.
So
Okay.
I empathize with your pain, or everyone's pain. No, the answer is exactly like Gurwin's. We would do more faster, but it's the exact same strategy. And if you look at our impact and compare us to other analogous nonprofits, we are an 8-figure operating nonprofit. I can tell you right now, our operating budget is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of that, because we are very thoughtful with our approach, and we are very successful in cobbling together resources from our members. We also candidly did this because we did the Asian thing of, we don't want to ask for money until we know what we have is something. We are now definitively confident in what we do across representation and success, and the numbers in the market prove it. So it's actually fortuitous, Aryani. We're actually starting to fundraise for the very first time since inception next month. And we've gone through this very rigorous budgeting exercise. We've built this so it doesn't just look like a nonprofit, it's actually sustainable. So, we're not going to, no offense to nonprofits, but we're not going to host a cute little gala every year with a bunch of celebrities who have nothing to do with us and do that every 12 months. That is not my plan. We are going to be fundraising for the next 3 years so we can sustain this. 100% of budget would go to staffing. Most people don't know this, but Gold House only has 1 full-time staff member, 6 part-time, and 60-person volunteer army, for whom they spend about, on average, 20 to 30 hours a week on Gold House. So it's material. And that's the volunteers again. And it's because they believe and because success begets more momentum. So I would devote it entirely to that staff because volunteers are wonderful, but are not promised forever. And then secondly, we would ensure that we can finance and launch more successful media representation, just as the damage we've done, good damage, I should say, in the film. We would launch and finance even more companies, just as we've already done with more than 500 in the last year. And we go from there.
I see. I'm beguiled by the scale of your operations, so I thought it was more corporate. But
Velocity matters, yeah.
Yeah. Gregory, the collective, is that a 501c3 or is that a movement? And I pose the same question to you in terms of, how you would scale, although I see that you already are.
Yeah, we are a 501c3, or we are fiscally sponsored by a 501c3. And so we'll definitely be excited about the idea of what additional resources could mean. I think in our conversations and strategy sessions, part of our hope is that we would be able to scale up the programming. As I think I mentioned before, part of our goal, since we actually started in the midst of COVID-19, most of our programming was virtual from the beginning. And we were able to work with folks with disabilities, particularly those who are deaf, deafblind, deaf disabled, and hard of hearing, to be able to actually provide ASL interpretation, captioning, and what we like to also include graphic facilitation for all of our town halls and events. We've gotten multiple requests to do simultaneous translation and interpretation in other Asian and Pacific Islander languages. So we would love to be able to figure out how we also make our programming accessible across a variety of languages, and to also be able to do ongoing, in addition to the programming, folks have also asked us for resources like lesson plans, key talking points. We've developed a variety of modules and workshop sessions that make it easy for folks to kind of facilitate a conversation in their homes, with their families, or in their classrooms, or with their local community. And so we would want to be able to find a way to scale those up so that people could be able to, more people could be able to have access to them and be able to have the resources they need to be able to facilitate those conversations. I think one separate thing that I would just lift up is a project that I got a chance to work on with a coalition of organizations, which we called Map the Truth. And Map the Truth was actually the creation of a COVID-19 coronavirus social justice guide, which was about how to really think about the messaging and language that will be a lot more unifying, that will be more about bringing folks together versus creating more division and creating more hate and fear amongst our communities, which some of the language that some folks referred to earlier are doing in our communities. And so this particular guide, specifically about COVID-19 and the coronavirus, gives recommendations on how you should be talking about this, the folks who are impacted by this, how they're impacted, and even imagery guidance, as well as a social media toolkit. So in case you want to share the word. So I would definitely lift that up as another thing to help get more folks in front of, so that no matter if you're in the media, if you are a community organizer, if you're a teacher, you're equipped with the right tools and language to discuss the virus and the impact the virus had on not only Asian Americans, but also all communities.
Thank you. So we have now a better understanding of what each of our panelists and their organizations have been doing. And now I'd like to open it up to more of a facilitated conversation with our three panelists. And I'd like to open it up. I've been listening carefully, and it's clear to me that you all have reached successfully those internal organization milestones, and that you have played a very significant role in addressing, the discrimination in the outside community. Now I'm going to ask you to kind of rate our efforts, our collective efforts as an Asian American Pacific Islander community in response to all the vitriol, the hate incidents, the street incidents, the political rhetoric that we've been hearing out there. How are we matching up to the challenge? is the question. So does anybody want to take a crack at that first?
I mean, I'll give a bunch of like loose like platitudes. I think first of all, let's recognize how unfair it is that it's our responsibility to fix someone else's problem, which is racism, right? This is just something that befalls any minority. So let's get real straight about that. But as my mother often says, we're given problems that we never asked for and told that we have to solve them. So this is just the way life is. I think the second and third thing are tied. I give us an F. We have failed. Because, you know, if this happens, we have failed, even though it wasn't our problem. And so I think, once again, we have to fight back even harder. We're like, if we think that anyone is going to give us, you know, some form of charity to fix the racism that has befallen our community, we are stuck in middle school and kidding ourselves. This is incumbent on us to embrace each other. As Gregory said earlier so astutely, this is about embracing all Asian ethnicities. Something I think, by the way, we only touched upon but really haven't addressed is we've been speaking about unification with other communities, but the reality is if you look at certain regions and or ethnicities in the Asian diaspora, they are just as if not more afflicted by both economic as well as judicial injustice, particularly the Southeast Asian population. So we have to embrace each other and pick each other up and fight back both productively with carrots and punitively with sticks. But the final thing I would say is I think we also get an A, because we're still here, you know, and actually, sorry, an A is an Asian F. This is now perpetuating bad stereotypes. I think we get an A+ as well, you know, like I think we need to remember the path to progress is gradual. And I think a lot of people, when they first saw a lot of the anti-Asian hate, suddenly think it's going to be a reverse tomorrow. This is not going to be a reverse tomorrow. Look at what it's taken other communities. It's literally centuries, and they are still not reversed. And so I think we have to give ourselves a little bit of flack and know that forward moving progress is okay. You know, if you report someone one day, that might feel like it's small and it's not going to change everything because it's not policy or commercially oriented, but one thing still matters, you know, and we can all do one thing. I'll bring up Sophia Cheng again. You know, this past weekend, she recorded a video sent to NextShark of that individual who was, you know, incredibly racist. And I'm pretty sure that individual just lost his job today. Or at least you can't find his LinkedIn anymore. And so, you know, this may seem very small and trivial, but the reality is every one of these hitbacks matters, you know, and we have to be comfortable with that. The other thing we have to remember is we are, unfortunately, because of our presidents and our leadership's failure, going to be in this pandemic for quite a bit longer, certainly longer than the rest of the world. And that has obviously created all sorts of undue stress on all of us, particularly children and particularly lower income communities who can't survive this. And so we once again have to give ourselves a break. You know, it's okay if you don't fight back every day in every way that everyone else is. That's okay. But I do think, again, you know, when you're not on those off days, you have to really be on.
Yeah, a couple of reactions that some of which I really agree with, and some I would want to put a little bit of pushback on, none that I completely disagree with. What I agree with is I think that we do need to be able to give ourselves grace, and that we are definitely in the long haul here. Because racism is not something that's going to be overturned in one night. But what I want to emphasize is I do think we have made a tremendous amount of progress. So I certainly wouldn't say the Asian American population very specifically, you know, is here because of the impact of the Civil Rights generation in being able to pass the Immigration Reform Act. And if that act wasn't here, the vast majority of Asian Americans that live in this country, including myself, would not be here. And when I speak to our elders, when I speak to people that were here in the 50s and the 40s, when I speak to people that I know that legitimately had to sit at the back of the bus, and compared to how my life is today in one generation, how much tremendously better my life is in a range of things, in terms of how people treat me, in terms of my educational opportunities, in terms of what I can even envision and dream of myself to be. So in that respect, I do think, you know, I always like to push back and say that there's no progress made, because I think that's disrespecting the people that came before us. But that's not to say that there is not a need for more work to be done. And that is where I think, why we exist, why all of us exist, because there is more work to be done. People are still affected by these issues to a very tremendous degree. And I think it's also very important to recognize that these issues are not going to move at the speed of social media. Changing hearts and minds is a long game. And one person told me, if Jesus couldn't change everybody, if Buddha couldn't change everybody, if Mahatma Gandhi couldn't change everybody, if Guru Nanak couldn't change everybody, why do we think we're going to change everybody in 240 characters? It's not going to happen overnight. It is something that is required a sustained, long-term effort that is require a tremendous amount of patience, a tremendous amount of empathy, a tremendous amount of love from everybody, and sometimes a tremendous amount of anger to fuel all of that. I just don't. I guess my final point is I just don't subscribe to the, hanging my head low and saying, nothing's ever been better. I think in many ways that's it's not true, and it's just not true, and it's disrespectful to those that became before us.
Well, I feel heartened to hear that, Gurwin, especially after, observing the Muslim bans, and this is, 20 years after 9/11. So that gives us, I already feel the energy propelling me forward. Gregory, did you want to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I would just say that, I think that if there's anything that I feel like this current moment is showing us is some of the holes and the gaps in the systems and the structures that we are in. And so in addition to addressing racism because of a virus, in response to a virus, how are we responding to racism in our healthcare system, in our education system, and in many of the sectors in which people are relying on or people are fueling to actually stay afloat, even in the time of crisis. And so the only other thing that I would say is that we must take holistic approaches to how we're looking at this, and I think that there's a way that, no matter what sector or what area you work in, there's likely work to be done. And so my recommendation to folks is to say, look, yes, the problems may be pretty big that we maybe ourselves may not feel like we can solve things right away. But in our homes, in our communities, in our sector that we are in, what are some of those things that we could be pushing for? And I think that there's a role for everyone. I think that there's different ways that we can push for change and to shift policies, shift narrative, build coalitions and partnerships. And I think it's important that we find what that is for us. And it may look different too. I know a lot of people are like, well, Greg, I want to do what you're doing, or but I can't, speak publicly, or sometimes I don't have the right words to say when I'm talking to my own family or when I'm talking to my neighbor. And, I think that there are a lot of resources out there available, but we have to also not compare, because our contributions and how we all will tackle racism, how we will push for change will look different. And so I also want to implore and encourage folks to find what that is, and that even if it may not look like the person next to you or someone that is doing this kind of work, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And we need multiple people in different places in different times pushing different strategies and tactics.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of new strategies and tactics, I've been hearing new ideas and seeing new groups, and among them is a call for a new organization. At the same time, I've been hearing from, Gurwin that, progress is also has to be, moderated, because we're talking about hearts and minds. So do we stay the course, or, do we need like a new entity or a brand new initiative?
In my opinion, I think we do need more entities. It's not, I don't want to get, misconstrued here. It's not that the urgency of this issue doesn't require more resources, because it does. So even though we have made progress. So in my mind, that's one of the reasons why I set up Know Your Neighbor, to work across faiths. And I think it would be a wonderful thing to do that specifically just for the Asian American community. And I think it'd be very timely for a number of reasons. Asian Americans are starting to participate more in politics. we're becoming more visible in society, even though not where we need to be. And I think having a solid advocacy foundation would be a tremendous asset in being able to seek the outcomes that we all want to see in terms of race, employment, and otherwise.
So I understand being where you have to, another appointment, I see. So is there anything you want to say before you leave? And we really appreciate having you here for this hour.
No, it's such a privilege to be here. I think two things are: one, I really like what Gurwin invoked, and what Gregory alluded to of the success of other minority communities has directly impacted us. So outside of just the Immigration Act, I mean, the fact that we can even marry interracially is because of the Black community. It was led actually by the Black community. And so I think, investing in other communities, if we have to be selfish, does necessarily reciprocate back to us as well, if you're not doing it just because you should as a human being. The only other thing I'd say is I think, and this is just a stylistic thing, I think a lot of us get obsessed with like names and brands and entities and so forth. We need to focus on impact. I don't think we need another organization to have another organization. We need to, first of all, look to each other and see what is all the great work that everyone is doing, and is there a way that we could actually unify so that we could amplify it even more, right? We call this the right to exist in Silicon Valley. If you are trying to just be redundant with something that else exists, you don't have a right to exist. So I think that's the gap first. Do I think conceptually there is a need for a Asian, they call it policing, which is so loaded these days, but monitoring system as well as corresponding policy advocacy arm? The answer is absolutely yes. So my question then would be, what are the existing wonderful organizations that are doing or trying to do great work there? Are they doing enough? And are there ways that we can amplify them so they can continue doing even better? And if not, then there's a right to exist for a new organization. But I think impact has to always be paramount before we try to, add another name and another acronym to the diaspora.
Right. Thank you so much, Bing.
Right.
For the rest of our audience, we are running for another half hour until 8:30. So I just want to do a check with both Gurwin and Gregory that we're still good to go to the close.
I actually have to run, but I had anticipated that we were running till 8. I guess I suppose I can go for another few minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Gregory, same deal. Okay.
Same deal. Okay. So let me end with this. So Bing raised something that I thought was evocative, which is, yes, we don't need another acronym to add to to that diaspora, but what about the idea of an umbrella coalition then, whose focus would be to measure the impact of all the existing organizations and to help with a unified strategy if that is going to be deemed to make the impact again that Bing was referring to. So I'll leave it open to who wants to speak to that.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question. I think as someone who was the former chair of the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, which is a coalition of more than 30 national Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander organizations, I think that this is an interesting question that I would say that it's important that folks come together, not for the sake of coming together, but on a unified goal. I think part of the challenge of having a broad umbrella, and the broader umbrella that it gets, is that there's at some point going to be a disagreement around a particular policy, a particular appropriate response or approach. And I think it then creates tension around, well, if we disagree on something, does that mean that we are that we are still a united front? And I think just as diverse as our community is in terms of our ethnicities and genders and nationalities and religions, et cetera, that we will also have diversity in thought and diversity in political analyses and diversity in, how we feel like is the best approach. And so while I'm not against having like an umbrella organization to be able to kind of like try to bring folks together, I'm very cautious and mindful of like, like the sensitivities and how much work it takes to kind of bring folks along and ensure folks are on the same page, whether it's a decision or even kind of the response or a strategy in terms of what folks are going to work on together. So I think The biggest thing for me as you think about an umbrella or building a coalition is, are you aligned on the goals and aligned on the outcomes, and how do you work together?
Thank you, Gregory. So I'm going to give the last word to Gurwin.
No, I very much agree. I think whoever embarks on this endeavor will have to navigate those waters, which are not always the easiest, because there will be disagreements. And I think if such an organization were to exist, the objectives and the goals have to be very clear, but also broad enough that enough people can sign on. And the second piece is organizationally, the organizations that would join in coalition also have to be very comfortable with working with people that they probably disagree with. Because I know your neighbor, for example, we had two organizations that were actually fighting each other in the Supreme Court, or in federal court rather. So there was a time, I remember very vividly, where the lawyers that were on either side were on a phone call, and as soon as against each other, conference call, and 30 minutes later, when that conference call ended, they came into the same room together for a Know Your Neighbor meeting, working on the same thing. You're probably not going to get to that level, but or hopefully not, but you're going to deal with those types of things. And I think what Gregory said is very astute in terms of the difficulty of pulling it off, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done.
Thank you. So with that, I want to thank both our panelists, Gregory Cendana, Gurwin Ahuja. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stay on to address the audience. I know you guys have commitments, so I'm going to release you, and I hope that we can continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, y'all. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you. So for the audience, what I'd like to say is that, we had actually extended this and for another half hour just to give space for Q&A. I think that we, had scheduling conflicts apparently with the other panelists, but I'm willing to stay on and continue the conversation because, again, this is a movement building, not something that lies with just the speakers. So I want to offer to open this up so that we can have a group conversation. Or if you need more time to sort of dwell on things, then we can also conclude this and reconvene at a future time. So if you could maybe write in the chat what you would like to do. Wrap up. Okay, so I'm getting some feedback here to wrap up. So one last call for any questions. Any thoughts to share with the other attendees? Or even any feedback to share with the panelists that we can be in contact with them after this panel, especially any actionable items or any thoughts that you want to share. Okay, barring none, I want to thank NCLF for hosting this panel. Again, want to thank Jan Shea for being our session chair, and our volunteers, Wen Yuan and Glenn, very much, and to all of you, Glenn Fon, and to all of you for being here and joining us in this conversation today. We hope that you will enjoy the other programming in the conference. And so with that, Jan, shall we take leave?
Yes, yeah. And tomorrow we have the same time, we have the small business part. And thank you so much for watching.
Okay, then we'll see you then.
Yeah.
Thank you and good night, everybody.